Hi everybody, I'm Belle Holder, the host of UNCTAD Conversations in Barbados. You know, the period 2020 to 2021 has been memorable in so many ways. The summer months saw the awe of St. Vincent's La Soufrière volcano spewing a blanket storm of ash resulting in massive cleanups. Then there was the lightning storm, which lit up the night sky and brought with it winds that blew off rooftops. Let's not forget the damages caused by Hurricane Elsa. Of course, the ongoing global challenges around the COVID-19 pandemic is definitely top of mind, and Barbadians have certainly not been spared from the resulting health crisis, economic fallout, challenges around online school, and tourism decline. Today, we're at Illawarra Court, the official residence of the Prime Minister of Barbados. And you know, with the challenges being faced by our small island developing states, surely there must still be room to acknowledge some victories. Barbados won the bid to become the first small island developing state to host the UNCTAD Conference, which is the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. With Barbados' Prime Minister as UNCTAD chair, the focus on needs of small island developing states was placed center stage. And now that we've gotten past the ideas and the discussions, it's time to look at outcomes and results. Our guest on today's UNCTAD Conversations is arguably one of the busiest women in the Caribbean. We'll be sitting down with Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mia Amor Mottley. There's lots to talk about, so let's get straight to it. I have to be honest, in approaching this interview, I thought there is so much going on in addition to UNCTAD. And the person I spoke to was my mother. And she said, "What are you going to ask her?" And I said, "Everything. I hope to ask her everything." So let's get straight through it. I know that you could not have dreamt up what your first term in office would be like with COVID-19 being present. So how do you wake up every day and determine this is the area that I'm going to tackle today?
With faith, with commitment, and with a determination that the mission that we had at the beginning is still our mission. What has happened, regrettably, as you said, is that we've had some serious obstacles. We had some potholes, we had some obstacles, but like in everything else in life, none of us know what each day is going to present. And it doesn't stop us from having the dreams that we have, or fighting with the purpose that we have, or having the faith that we have to keep us going.
It would be remiss of me not to take this opportunity to say congratulations, first of all, on being the first small island developing state to host UNCTAD. It came, I think, at a time that we really need to pay attention to how many wonderful women were serving in particular roles for the first time. So in your assessment now, you tell us your assessment of the outcomes and what we need to look forward to.
I think UNCTAD 15 gave us an opportunity to do a number of things. One, to show that size cannot and must not constrain you. And that was the point made about us being the smallest to host it. Secondly, that we had some things to say. And you know, Shirley Chisholm, who was Barbadian, I think used to say all the time that if you're not invited to the table, you bring a folding chair and come. Well, we kind of insisted that we could be invited to the table by getting the conference, but we brought our folding chair on issues that hitherto much of the developed world didn't necessarily want to have exposed in the same way. So we put in there clearly issues pertaining to vulnerability, to our perspective on the climate crisis, to our perspective on vaccine equity and the pandemic. We were able truly, I believe, to allow UNCTAD to become what it was always intended to be, the voice of the developing world.
Yeah.
The other thing that I was very proud about is that we captured them in both the Bridgetown Covenant as well as the Spirit of Speightstown, which is the political declaration. And it means a lot to me that we've been able to put those names that are associated, of course, with other things in our own country and greatness in our own country. But we've allowed these names now to be part of the global trek towards ensuring that people can move towards development in a sustainable way. And that we have the Bridgetown Covenant and that we have the Spirit of Speightstown is good, but what is better is the content of each of those documents that for the first time says, look, stop with the one-size-fits-all prescription, because there are nuances and there are differences and we need to be able to address these issues if we're going to see progress in trade and development.
I think it's important too for us to emphasize to Barbadians that these are not untouchable exclusive documents that they don't have access to.
Yep.
They're all online. You can go
Yep.
to unctad15.org and just click
Please.
on documents and read them.
And in fact, we're trying to share them as
Yeah.
well, because they give Bajans context as to the world in which we live now and what we're facing.
Yeah, the former Prime Minister, Owen Arthur, I understand, was looking at, before he passed, he was looking at outcomes, and he was emphasizing that, we have these conferences, everybody's charged up, the documents are done, but then how do we make sure that there's follow through?
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we're trying to do now. That's why we were so gung-ho on ensuring that the work of the IMF with the Resilience and Sustainability Trust that looks at concessional finance being anchored not just by GNI per capita, but also by vulnerability, a consideration of what we really face. And these are some of the things that are coming out even since UNCTAD 15. And it may seem recent, but the truth is that the IMF board only dealt with that a week ago. So we are seeing progress. As I said, it is a relay race, but we have to remain committed to passing the baton and staying focused.
Yeah. I think I've heard the quote, punching above its weight, in reference to Barbados more this year than I ever have in the past. But the trouble with progress for Barbados is that in terms of aid, the country will be judged by what we have achieved as a developing nation rather than by the existing and potential vulnerabilities. What is your response to that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's why this week when we did the debate for the election of the first president of the nation, I made it clear that what mattered to us as a nation is not November 30th, but in fact December 1st. That if ever there was a time that we need to come together, if ever there was a time that we need to move with the same purpose, it is now. And it is because of what we confront. And the irony is we shouldn't feel sorry for ourselves, because others before confronted challenges of similar proportion with less capacity to meet them. And they were our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our great-great-grandparents, and they did it, and we are here, and we shall do it, and we will have others here 50 years, 30 years, 100 years from now.
In your recent meeting with U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, you both emphasized the relationship between America and Barbados, and of course the relationship between America and CARICOM.
As you know, and I think about and talk about all the time, I truly believe that our world is interconnected and interdependent more so than ever before, as highlighted by the most recent events, including the pandemic, but also as highlighted by one of the greatest crises that we face as a globe, which is the climate crisis. Our conversation today will, I believe, cover a number of these issues, including not only what we must do in the short term, but the potential that our relationship has in the long term to address these issues in a way that has positive impact for the people of our two countries.
What plans can you share with us for deepening that relationship?
Well, I think we recognize that, look, we have to do better. We work and live in the same neighborhood, and we have common difficulties. I keep saying that a hurricane may or may not hit a particular Caribbean country every year, but what's the one country that it hits every year, more often than not? It's the United States of America. Different states, different parts, but it hits there. So there's a lot of common challenges that we face. I think that we feel that we need sometimes to be heard more. And I'm therefore grateful that we were able to re-engage and to recalibrate aspects of our relationship. And I'm confident that we can build on that. Relationships in families, in communities, in weird places of employment, they ebb and flow. And we felt that it was important for us to recalibrate and to work together with a common purpose to the things that matter to each of us. Barbados has always been very clear as well that we are prepared to work with people who share our values and who have a similar mission as us. And quite frankly, whether it is the United States of America, Canada, China, the United Kingdom, European Union, Kenya, Ghana, Panama, we will work with all. Because as was said when we became independent, we are friends of all and satellites of none. And we try to let people know that the experience of being a small island developing state is in fact different. And there are certain risks that we face that perhaps might not meet others. In the United States of America, yes, they face hurricanes potentially every year, but they don't face the wipeout risk that we face as a small island developing state.
Okay.
So it's that different perspective that matters.
Similar challenges, yes, definitely not similar resources,
Exactly.
however. So punching above your weight is one thing metaphorically, but how are we even stepping into the game with the
But the
United
truth
States?
is that COVID makes us know in no uncertain way that we are small. We're small in terms of our ability to be able to access the goods, the therapeutics, the vaccines, the things that we know. But we also realize that larger countries who are developing countries have the same issues as well. So believe you me, this has been an unbelievably challenging experience. But it is one, as I said, that we're not prepared to literally surrender to because we feel that we can make it. And we need sometimes to step back and put things in context. Regrettably, we belong to a civilization that does in fact challenge humanity every so often. And if you look across the different centuries that have gone before, you've seen examples of failed states, examples of extinct species. So the truth is that there's a certain arrogance about being human that causes us to feel it won't be us. But just as others before us have had to face difficulties of a public health nature or wars, we too have now had to face our challenge. And that's why I've said to the country, look, this is not a sprint. This is a marathon. And we have to learn to live with it. The views of most of the scientists are that this pandemic, COVID, will eventually become endemic. In other words, we will live with it. It's like the flu. We live with dengue. We live with chickenpox. But the reality is that we do all know people who haven't gotten chickenpox, may sometimes get shingles, and may not sometimes make it. We all know somebody somewhere in the region who has known somebody or who themselves had family that got dengue, and either they made it or in some instances, regrettably, they didn't make it. So these things are part and parcel of life. They're as tragic as, for example, an accident happening. The difference is this is not an accident.
Yeah.
They are as long, regrettably, as a lot of wars, but this is not a war in the traditional sense. What it means is that we have now to be able to see how, apart from what government does, to accept that there's really personal responsibility with respect to how we behave. Who is the person that can protect you the most, Belle? It is you.
Yeah.
You look in the mirror and you see that person. And when we ask persons to physically distance, who are we asking them to do? We're asking you, the individual, to physically distance. When we say to you, sanitize, we're not asking your neighbor to sanitize alone, we're asking you to sanitize. And therefore, when we say that, look, you should vaccinate because it gives you the best protection against death or the best protection against serious hospitalization, it's because it does. And the evidence is now there to show that more than half the world's population, more than 3 billion people across the world, have already taken the vaccinations. And if they were going to be problematic, trust me, you would have known in major ways. Yes, there are some people who have an allergic reaction, but it is not large numbers. And the world, regrettably, has seen that across other vaccines, not
Right.
just this.
I always say numbers are not just numbers, though.
That's right.
Because
They're
if it falls on your front door and it's a member of your family who has an adverse reaction, numbers are never just numbers.
Listen, life is hard. This year I lost my brother. And I lost my brother from something that he should not have died from. And it wasn't COVID. It was something completely different. Bottom line is that things happen. And if I could do anything in the world to bring him back, I would, because he was my effective twin. He was my Irish twin. So that life is hard. And I get it more than most because of what I've gone through this year. But it doesn't mean that life stops. And we have to be able to balance the good and the bad, the hills with the valleys. The truth is that we can make it. But we need people to accept that not everybody's circumstances are going to be the same, and therefore each of us must do the best that we must to protect ourselves. Having said that, the government itself has a responsibility to expand capacity. That's why we went last year at the beginning of the outbreak, and we built Harrison's Point. That's why we continue to expand the numbers and the training that was available. That's why we brought in 100 nurses from Cuba and a few doctors. That's why we brought in 100 nurses. Well, the Ghanaian ones were coming, but we were intending and knew that we needed them even more once the pandemic broke. So that believe you me, we will do our part and we will structure what we can. But at the same time, this is a clear case of partnership making success.
Yeah. No matter what your responsibilities are, no matter what your job is, a personal loss is a personal loss.
Yeah.
And I have to be honest with you. I looked at that situation and asked myself, how does she do it? So I'm asking you now, how do you do that? How do you suffer such a personal loss and you continue and you pick
With
up and you keep
faith
going?
and to understand that you're not the only person who's ever done it. And others have had to pick up and keep going. It's difficult. There are times when you sit down and you reflect and you'll either see me smile or you'll see me swallow a little harder. And it depends on what the memory has evoked. But life is about life and death. It's not just about life. And philosophically, we have all had to come to grips with that as individuals, because the gift of life means the gift of accepting that we will die at some point. And the question is, how best do we treat to that? How do we prepare ourselves for it? And at the end of the day, as I keep saying, we're same people like everybody else. And leadership is not who I am. Leadership, this job is what I do, but it's not who I am. And that's why on a Saturday I still like to put on a t-shirt and a pair of jeans to remember who I am, because who I am is not what I do.
On that note, we're going to take a commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation, our UNCTAD conversation, with Prime Minister Mia Amor Mottley. We'll be right back. Welcome back to UNCTAD Conversations, everybody. I'm sitting down with the Prime Minister of Barbados, Prime Minister Mottley, at Illawarra Court, the official residence of the Prime Minister. Recently, you made an address at the United Nations General Assembly, and one of the American news channels covered it by saying, the Prime Minister of Barbados dropped the mic at UNGA.
If I used a speech prepared for me to deliver today, it would be a repetition of what you have heard from others and also from me. Equally, how many more times will we then have a situation where we say the same thing over and over and over to come to naught? My friends, we cannot do that anymore.
For my assessment of it was, you went in there and said, I am tired of all the lip service that is being paid. And what are we going to do to make a difference going forward?
And I said it sincerely. Look, we're getting ready to go to Glasgow in just over a week. The world is going to come to grips with what kind of world we want to live in. Those who felt 10, 15 years ago that this was idle talk or Al Gore didn't know what he was talking about with inconvenient truth have now lived to see the fires and the droughts and the sargassum and the hurricanes and all of the other things that we've had to literally endure, while also in our part of the world seeing the destruction of parts of our marine life. When we were children, you would see cobblers and sea eggs and all kinds of things. Nowadays, you hardly see them. The bottom line is that time has run out on us. And, I use the analogy also of minding the gap, because it is that gap that we are going to allow to exist over 1.5 degrees that's going to make our lives, especially those of us who live in small island developing states first, very different. We understood, and 2-3 years ago we kept saying that we're going to have to broaden this discussion to include not just small island developing states, because we're not making a difference in people hearing us or seeing us. And let us therefore look at those countries between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. Well, it doesn't look as though that has had the same level of impact. Clearly, there is more attention. Clearly, there are more private sector companies coming on board. Clearly, there is more action on the part of countries. But the question is it enough for us to be able to survive well? And regrettably, it's not looking that way. We still live in hope. And I felt at that UN speech we needed to highlight a number of things that were clearly patent, from the climate crisis to to the reality of the pandemic with respect to vaccine inequity, with respect to the question of what I call the greatest tragedy beyond those who have received COVID, that is the tragedy of our children. They are almost suffering in the same way that they would in the middle of a war, where their education would have been disrupted in war. So that these things are of deep concern because they're not just simply a case of oil prices going up tomorrow and how do you adjust an economy, or debt may have gone up and how do you adjust debt. These things have the capacity to alter our quality of life and the trajectory of our nation forevermore. And I felt that it was critical that humanity needed to stop. Human beings need to stop. Ironically, today is UN Day, and I'm going to do something else for them shortly. But we need to stop and ask ourselves, really, what was this about? Can we actually believe that it is okay for some countries to have access to vaccines, others not to, and then all of a sudden you get variants? We know the consequences of failing to share. In the same way that a child is taught at 5 years old and 4 years old and 3 years old of the consequences of failing to share, because we are told that it's not good, it's not nice. The values that underpin us as individual human beings, regrettably, are not being reflected when the collective, the nation state, takes the decisions.
Right.
And that's all we're trying to highlight.
Yeah, you did mention COPs, which is coming up, and climate change is on everyone's lips now, but it's certainly not a new conversation. I'm going to take your mind back, and I know you love history. In 1989, the Commonwealth members countries signed the Langkawi Declaration. Prime Minister, that was 32 years ago, right? And the Langkawi Declaration said that the countries were committing to, and these are just some of them that I pulled out: energy efficiency, restricting non-sustainable fisheries, and preventing dumping of toxic and hazardous materials in the oceans or in developing countries. And that was 32 years ago. But it lacked follow through.
Yeah.
And here we are today, now having to deal with the consequences of that inaction 32 years ago. What are you and the other membership leaders going to do differently?
Don't go so far. Look next door there. You see that building there? The Lloyd Erskine Sandyford Center? When was that built for? That was built for the first 1994, the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development for Small Island Developing States. Out of that came the Barbados Program of Action. This battle has been long. And that's why I said, regrettably, we're not getting the sense that people were listening to us sufficiently. Therefore, we broadened it to be able to say, okay, don't only deal with small states. You feel that we're expendable or disposable? Cool. Don't like it, but that's all right. Let's now see what's happening to you. And let's see what's happening to other countries between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. So that it is regrettable that in spite of making these soundings, in spite of making these arguments for the last 3 decades or more, not just on this, on vulnerability. You hear us talk about vulnerability all the time. It has taken till now for us to begin to see some movement. The International Monetary Fund, for example, has finally accepted, and we thank them because they're now leading the pack, the notion of vulnerability as a valid criteria in determining access to concessional funding, with a new trust that they're creating called the Resilience and Sustainability Trust, that is in fact being established to help us meet the needs of adapting to a new world with the climate crisis. And you notice that I don't ever talk about climate change. I talk about the climate crisis,
Right.
because it is a crisis for us. When we were children, up to a decade ago, far less children, were you accustomed to having short, sharp rain showers in this country in the afternoon? That's not what we're accustomed to. So that there are just so many things, and I regret that it has taken so long. I regret that we are unlikely to close the gap sufficiently, and therefore we have now to press the accelerator on the other aspect of it, which is how do we adapt?
Right.
How do we prepare for this new environment within which we are going to live? How do we protect those people who live on the coast or who have businesses on the coast? How do we ensure that the aquifers that we have that are near the coast don't have saltwater intrusion? Because if they do, then those aquifers will be lost to us as a groundwater source for us to be able to give water in a country that is already one of the 15 most water scarce countries. And here's the problem that I've had with Barbados. We've been saying that since the late 1990s, early 2000s. But have we really prepared as a government and as a nation for that reality that we knew was coming down the line with water scarcity? In my view, not sufficiently, and not with the kind of focus and strategic objective that we had.
Okay.
We've been talking about flooding. Have we prepared appropriately? Not sufficiently. That is why the government that we have now is trying to see how best we can avert flooding wherever possible, how much we can gather water, how we can ensure that those people who are into farming, because we do need food and nutritional health, because we've now learned that the disruption of the global supply chain can hurt us where it hurts most, with medicine and with food. And therefore we need to get our people being able to protect ourselves as a nation, just as I'm asking you to protect yourselves as an individual. Yeah. It is that partnership and that understanding of what is my role, where do I fit in to this grand exercise. If we don't do it in the next 12 to 15 years, then Barbados and other countries like us will be caught napping and will pay the consequences regrettably.
You know what I think part of the climate change issue is, the climate crisis issue is that the conversations take place at a level where, and I consider myself like everybody else, John Q. Public, and the conversations take place at a level that we may not necessarily understand how it affects our day-to-day life and what can I do differently. So you mentioned the Conference of Parties, which is coming up October to November 2021, which you will be attending in the UK. 200 countries will be there and will be asked to cut emissions. But what does that mean for the man and woman in the street in Barbados? How would it affect our day-to-day lives? What do we need to do differently?
Well, a number of things. I mean, first of all, we're encouraging the country to go towards renewable energy. And that means not just the big renewable energy farms that people are clearly trying to develop, but the government has also launched a program, Home Ownership Providing Energy. And as you know, that is dealing particularly with the low income and lower middle income houses, where we're using the revenue from the roofs as well as a means of helping to secure the capacity of those people to be able to afford to get a mortgage and to own their own house. So we feel that the two can come together. We're doing the same thing in agriculture, because we have a sugar industry where the cost of production has far exceeded the cost, with the money which you get for selling the sugar. And therefore the government has had to subsidize the sugar industry for decades now. We're saying, look, drawbreaks. Let us look and see how a sugar factory, which really is a power factory for 3 months of the year in our context, can become a power factory for 12 months of the year, thereby bringing a source of revenue for the people who are involved in the industry, to make sure that we can offset the differential between the cost of production and how much we get at it, while at the same time looking to see how we can create more value added and do other things with the sugar cane plant, as opposed to just the sugar that we focus on. We're also trying to see, for example, how we can get Barbadians to conserve water more. At the end of the day, it's not only about augmenting water, but it's also about reducing water usage, especially if it comes to be wasted. So that there's so many little things in terms of cars. More and more we're going to be asking Barbadians to move and transition into electric cars and hybrid cars, and eventually even some fueled by hydrogen and vehicles. The government has already bought just 49 buses, I think, electric buses. We probably have the largest electric bus fleet in the Caribbean at the moment, and we're on our way to continuing. The only reason we didn't do it with the sanitation trucks is because at the time when we were buying, and you know they were urgently needed, there really was not the opportunity there in the same way. But I anticipate more and more and more of the equipment and the transport that we buy is going to be in that new arena, because we have to reduce the level of fossil fuel things that we have. We do have some engagement in the fossil fuel sector, because we do have offshore. We did have natural gas before, and we're working with others to see how we can contain what we are doing without spoiling our opportunities as a small island developing state, but also recognizing that you can be in church and chapel too. And at some point, the fossil fuel subsidies have to stop, as well as the building of new coal plants and the various other things that are affecting how we live. So it ranges from here right back down to the bottom. All of us have a role to play.
All right, so we're going to take another quick commercial break, and we're going to come back. We really want to talk about the children of Barbados. We'll be right back on UNCTAD Conversations. Welcome back to UNCTAD Conversations. We're sitting down today with Prime Minister Mottley, and it would be remiss of me not to talk about the children of Barbados.
Okay.
And there is something called Future Barbados, which I know you're very excited about.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, Future Barbados is our concept of how do we get people who are currently not involved in nation building to become involved and to help spread it. Like the same way how COVID is contagious, I want nation building to be contagious. Same way. And what we did was to say, look, let's create some challenges. And yes, we have a public service. Yes, we have the private sector. Yes, we have all of these other people. I want to hear the young people. I want to hear what you feel should be done in order to do a number of challenges across the board. And we did it conscious that one of the things that happened in COVID as well was that people, private sector and public sector, were not hiring necessarily in the same way as before. And we ran the risk of some of these kids just being disenchanted and feeling that they're on the side of it. I said, no, come. Tell me how you're going to reduce childhood obesity in this country by 50% in the next 5 years. Tell me how we're going to deal with the challenges of climate in the next 5 years and reducing the extent to which we see the plastics and protecting our coral reefs and those other things. Tell me how we are going to be able to embrace the digital world in which we live while at the same time not compromising who we are and not ignoring the values that are necessary to maintain in this world. Tell me how we're going to deal with mental wellness, because this generation, this young generation, more than any other, has said for all to hear that we are not prepared to go where every other generation has gone before. And we know that human beings do have issues with mental wellness, and we need to deal with them upfront and clearly and think. Tell me how we're going to deal also with the blue economy. Barbados has ocean space. That's 424 times what our land space is. So this is a way of unlocking the creativity. This is a way of hearing what they have to say, adding to it, but it is also allowing us to solve national problems, but by our most valued resource, our young people, and giving them the opportunity to be mentored by the rest of us there. And for me, this was important. I came into public life at a very young age. In fact, I was 23 years old when I became a candidate. I was 25 when I went into the Senate, when I first ran and lost. And I keep saying that life is a journey, and we need to be real with people and to be able to embrace as many as we can. And I feel strongly that if we can get our young people involved in this act, how many times do we say many hands make light work?
That's true.
If we can get them full of passion about trying to save the world in which we live in with respect to the climate crisis and to understand the consequences of what we face. The other major problem that Barbados has is that, of course, we have not replaced our population since 1980. Now, that's a major, major issue, and we haven't, as a country, tried to prepare ourselves for it. How do you accept that you will have a labor force less than you do today in 13 years' time? That has implications for how much taxes are paid. That has implications for the level of productivity. There's a whole host of conversations that we need to have. So we've reached this juncture in history where we've said, look, let us assess our challenges, but let us use everybody that we have to be able to get
I want to
on
ask
board.
a really simple question about the children of Barbados right now. And these are the ones who are in school and facing the online learning platforms and stuff like that, and the things that they're saying. And I was processing for these interviews, this UNCTAD series that I've done. And one of the things that occurred to me is there are children and families in this country who depended upon that hot lunch 5 days a week that they would get in school in the form of school meals services. They're home now, staring their mothers in the face, staring their fathers in the face, mostly mothers, let's be honest, in the face. What do we say to those families who know, because that would have been hot lunches 5 times a week for 3 months. They don't have that access at the moment. What do you say to those families?
That's why Bellevue have had to produce and present an amazing package to be able to help support people. The government, first of all, recognized that we needed to increase the welfare rates because that had not been increased for some time. Remember earlier we had already increased the non-contributory pension significantly. We also expanded the amount that we would give, increased the amount that we would give to welfare beyond increasing the rates so that we knew more people would benefit. In addition, we created a $600 family support mechanism through the Household Mitigation Unit, and as many at one point as over 4,000 families were benefiting from that island-wide. We also recapitalized the Unemployment Benefit Fund and recapitalized other things that were necessary to be able to support people through the National Insurance Scheme. It's not been easy. And then, of course, when we had the second major lockdown, we also did care packages for over 85,000 households.
Yeah, but those are one-offs.
Those were one-off,
Right.
but they were in the middle of a lockdown.
Yeah.
And most other countries in the world have not done anything like that at all for anybody. But I'm showing you this because at the end of the day, it's about what we've been trying to do along this marathon. But the marathon is now 21 months. So, and we recognize that the most sustainable way is still through people having access to their jobs. And that's why I've said to the country, okay, look, we carried you when there was no vaccines. Truth. We carried you when there was no vaccines. We carried you as long as we could, but the truth is that you have to help us carry you now. And you help us carry you by protecting yourself so that work can come back to people, that people can go and find jobs in the construction sector again, in the tourism sector, in the retail sector, in the agricultural sector. Because what have we learned? We've learned that our population is not sufficient to support what we need in order to support this quality of life. So that the farmers learned that simply producing for Barbadians alone does not give them what they need to sustain themselves. They needed also the tourists, because remember, you're talking about 700,000 tourists a year who would normally be on island as long-stay visitors, and then about another just under, it's about 850, 880,000 who come for the day as cruise passengers. You got to feed them. You got to make sure that everything is on island for them. If all of a sudden 700,000 long-stay visitors disappears and the majority of the cruise passengers disappear, it means that there's less food being consumed. It means that there's less food to be transported. It means that there are less jobs to be had. So all of these things obviously became a constraint. What we're saying now, as we've done and supported people through the expansion of the welfare and support mechanisms, we need to go back into substantive work now, because you have the capacity to go to work in a safe environment.
Right.
And you're either going to vaccinate or you're going to test regularly for us to make sure that you're working in that safe environment. As it relates to other matters and as it relates to leisure time activities, well, the government is going to give people more flexibility in terms of how they create those safe zones.
All right. Before we wrap up, your role as UNCTAD chair, you have another 3 years in the seat to make sure that everybody is focused on Barbados and the small island developing states. That 3 years falls outside of when the election is constitutionally due. And we all know government is a continuum. And anything can happen at the polls. Anything can happen at the polls. So how do you put that into context to make sure what you know, the work that needs to be done, depending on whatever happened at the polls, that the work continues?
Work hard and flat out each day. And let me tell you why. The job that I have a record to beat. I belong now to a group of people where the mortality rate has been 1 in 2. And it is up to me to prove that we will not have a 1 in 2 mortality rate for prime ministers. So the same thing that guides me to make sure that I work hard every day in spite of that 1 in 2 mortality is the same attitude I will have towards working hard every day, such that if the will of the people is to put someone else in this chair, as is their right, then they will have the best hand to play. And why? Because at the end of the day, I am a proud Barbadian is not just a song by the Sand Pebbles. It is how I feel, and it is how I would like every Barbadian to feel.
Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Just that the world is ahead of us now, and we have a responsibility to band together as one and to fight the battles. The majority of our battles as Bajans now are in fact outside again, not so much within. And if we can find the courage and keep the commitment and the dedication and the perseverance necessary to stay on that journey, I know that we will do well. And I've already seen the extent to which people regionally and internationally are prepared to help us. And then within Barbados, I've seen the extent to which older people are prepared to work with younger people, because we recognize that whether as a country or as a person, this thing called life is a relay. And this thing called life is full of challenges and full of surprises. But once you're rooted you can do the best that you can always.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the
Thank
time
you.
out of your, I know you're very busy schedule to sit down with us. Really appreciate it. Please take care of your health.
Thank you. Thank you also for this series of conversations. I think that you've added significant value to being able to share, not just with Barbadians, but others across the world, a little snippet of who we are and what we stand for and what we really want to fight for. And I thank you for adding to that conversation.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. And thank you too for watching. My name is Belle Holder, and I've really enjoyed bringing this series to you of UNCTAD Conversations, the opportunity to see the work that's being done at sometimes maybe levels that you don't think you can attain, but you do. And so we thank you very much for tuning in. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye, everybody.